Somewhere in Europe, 6 tons of carved amber and gold might still be sitting in the dark. Nobody's found it in 80 years. People have spent their whole lives looking for it. A few of them never got their answer. Was it burned to ash in a fire? Buried in a forgotten mine? Or sitting at the bottom of the sea? This isn't some ancient legend either. This mystery is barely older than your own grandparents. Right now, somewhere, a search team is still digging, still convinced the answer is close. They called it the 8th wonder of the world, a room built entirely from amber and gold. Then a war swallowed it whole, and when the fighting stopped, the room was simply gone. Governments have spent millions chasing rumors. Hunters have spent their savings, and sometimes it seems their lives. One investigator got closer than anyone ever had. Then he was found dead, and the trail went cold again. So what really happened to it? Let's go back to where it all began, with a king who wanted something impressive. Born from amber, Prussian origins. It starts in 1701, in the court of a Prussian king freshly crowned and eager to prove his kingdom mattered. Amber wasn't just pretty. In Prussia, it was practically a national obsession. Fossilized tree resin, millions of years old. The Baltic coast produced more amber than anywhere else on Earth. Prussia guarded that supply like a state secret. So the king ordered something nobody had ever attempted, an entire room, wall to wall, made of nothing but amber. It was a nightmare to build. Amber is brittle, it cracks in the cold, and it never comes in large pieces. So the craftsman improvised, backing the amber with gold leaf and mirrors to amplify every flicker of light. Piece by piece, panel by panel, a wall of warm, glowing color began to take shape inside the palace. But the king who started it all didn't get to finish it. He died in 1713, the room still incomplete. His son took the throne next, and he could not have cared less about a room made of tree sap. The new king was blunt, frugal, and obsessed with his army. Decorative amber walls were not exactly his priority. For a while, the half-built room just sat there, crated up, half-finished, gathering dust in storage. Then, in 1716, something changed everything. The King of Prussia needed a favor from the Tsar of Russia. Prussia wanted Russia as an ally against Sweden, and the Tsar, as it turned out, loved anything extravagant. So the Prussian king made a decision that would echo for the next 300 years. He gave the room away. A gift between kings, Peter's prize. The gift traveled over 1,000 miles, 18 wooden crates rattling across roads never built for something this fragile. When the crates finally reached St. Petersburg, nobody quite knew what to do with them. The Tsar was thrilled with his new prize. He just wasn't in any hurry to actually unpack it. Russia in the early 1700s was busy building an entire new capital from scratch. An amber room could wait. So the crates sat there, year after year, the most extravagant gift in Europe, gathering dust in storage. In 1725, the Tsar died, and the amber room still hadn't been assembled, not even once. For the next several decades, Russian rulers came and went. The crates just kept waiting for someone to care. Finally, one empress decided enough was enough. She wanted that amber room built, and she wanted it bigger. Empress Elizabeth had a taste for spectacle that bordered on obsession. Subtlety was never really her strong suit. In 1755, she ordered the room moved to her new favorite palace and rebuilt on a much grander scale. The job went to a foreign court architect already famous for turning Russian palaces into pure theatrical excess. There was just one problem. The original panels weren't nearly big enough to fill the new room, so more amber was ordered from Berlin. Whole new sections had to be designed and carved from scratch. What started as a modest gift was about to become something the world had never quite seen before. The room Reborn, a palace of light. Rebuilding the room meant solving a puzzle nobody had solved before. How do you scale up something this delicate? Master amber cutters worked for years, matching colors, shaping mosaics, fitting thousands of individual amber pieces by hand. Behind every panel, craftsmen layered gold leaf and mirrored glass to multiply the light bouncing through the amber. By the time it was finished, the room held roughly 6 tons of amber and precious stone, an entire wall of gemstones. Empress Elizabeth insisted on constant updates. She wanted this room to outshine every palace in Europe, full stop. Sunlight through the windows didn't just light the room, it seemed to set the entire wall on fire. Mirrors lined every corner, so the glow seemed to repeat forever, panel after panel after panel. When it was finally complete, Elizabeth used the room as a place to meditate, and, more often, to show off. Visitors called it unlike anything they'd ever seen. Some genuinely struggled to describe it in their own letters home. Amber, it turns out, is temperamental. It expands, contracts, and cracks with every shift in temperature. So the palace kept a dedicated amber restorer on staff, constantly repairing and refreshing the walls by hand. Every few years, sections had to be dismantled, repaired, and reassembled, a maintenance job that never really ended. Over the following century, the room passed from ruler to ruler, each one adding their own small touches. Catherine the Great used it, so did the last of the Romanov Tsars. It became a fixture of Russian royal life. By the early 1900s, the amber room wasn't just furniture. It was a national treasure, one of Russia's crown jewels. Nobody in that glowing room could have imagined what was coming. Within a few decades, it would vanish completely. The eighth wonder, Splendor under the Tsars. By the 20th century, people across Europe had heard rumors of a Russian room built entirely from amber. In 1917, someone finally took a color photograph of the room, the only one that would ever exist. That same year, revolution swept through Russia. The Tsars fell, and the palace became property of the state. Instead of destroying the palace, the new government turned it into a museum, open to the public for the first time. For regular people who'd never set foot in a palace before, the Amber Room was genuinely breathtaking. Museum staff cataloged every detail, every panel, every mosaic, every mirror, just in case anything ever happened to it. Nobody expected they'd need those records so badly, so soon. Through the 1920s and 30s, the palace settled into a quiet routine: tours, school trips, the occasional foreign dignitary. Then in the summer of 1941, that quiet routine ended in a single afternoon. Nazi Germany had just launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, and Leningrad sat directly in its path. At the palace, the museum's young curator realized, almost immediately, exactly what was at stake. He had days, maybe hours, to figure out how to save a room made of the most fragile material imaginable. Paintings could be rolled up and shipped east. Statues could be buried in the garden. Amber could not. So he tried something desperate, hiding the entire room in plain sight right where it stood. War comes to Russia. The plan was simple: cover the amber so completely that nobody would even guess it was there. It didn't look convincing up close. But there wasn't time for anything better. Curators had also tried to dismantle a few panels for evacuation. The amber simply crumbled in their hands. Decades of dry heat and old glue had made the amber far too brittle to safely move. So the choice came down to this: leave it hidden under wallpaper and hope for the best. Meanwhile, the German army kept advancing, faster than almost anyone in the city expected. By September of 1941, German troops had reached the outskirts of the town where the palace stood. Museum staff evacuated what they could carry and fled east, leaving the disguised amber room behind them. Within days, the palace itself fell under German occupation, along with everything still inside it. Germany had specialized units whose entire job was locating and cataloging valuable art in occupied territory. The Amber Room wasn't exactly a secret. Art experts on both sides already knew it existed, and where. It reportedly took them almost no time at all to figure out what was hiding underneath that wallpaper. The disguise had bought a few weeks. It was never going to buy much more than that. Word of the discovery reached a museum director back in Germany, a man who'd spent his whole career studying amber. For him, this wasn't politics. This was, in his mind, the professional opportunity of an entire lifetime. Within weeks, orders came down. The amber room was leaving Russia, whether it survived the trip or not. Stolen in 36 hours. A team of specialists arrived with strict instructions. Take the whole room apart and do it fast. According to later accounts, they dismantled the entire room in roughly 36 hours. It's a staggering pace. Each panel was wrapped in cotton wadding, then packed flat into custom wooden crates lined with fabric. By the time they finished, the entire room fit into 27 numbered crates. The bare walls left behind looked nothing like the glowing room that had stood there just days earlier. The crates were loaded onto trucks, then transferred to a waiting freight train bound for East Prussia. The destination was Königsberg, a city on the Baltic coast, several hundred miles to the west. Waiting there was the same museum director who'd requested the room in the first place. He'd already picked out exactly where in Königsberg Castle he wanted the room reassembled. Crews unloaded the crates carefully, carrying each one up ancient castle stairways by hand. For the curator, this felt less like theft and more like a homecoming. Amber, after all, was practically local. Königsberg Castle had thick stone walls and centuries of history. It seemed like the safest place in Europe. Reassembly began almost immediately. Piece by piece, the amber room started to glow again, just somewhere new. By 1942, the room was back on public display, inside a German castle, 1,000 miles from where it belonged, Exile in Königsberg. Alfred Rode wasn't just managing the room. By most accounts, he'd become completely infatuated with it. He published academic papers on amber craftsmanship. He gave tours himself, refusing to delegate the honor to anyone. For a few years, life in Königsberg went on almost normally. Museums, concerts, castle tours for visiting officials. The war, at that point, still felt distant to most people inside the castle's thick stone walls. Rode requested more amber shipments to expand the display even further, treating the war as a minor inconvenience. But by 1943, the war had started swinging hard against Germany, and everyone could feel it. Allied bombing raids were becoming a real threat to German cities, including ones nowhere near the front lines. Some colleagues urged Rode to crate the room up again and move it somewhere safer, further inland. He resisted. Moving it again risked damaging panels that had already survived one dangerous journey. There was also a simpler reason. Nobody was entirely sure where safer even was anymore. So the room stayed put, glowing quietly inside the castle, while the war crept steadily closer. In August of 1943, the room was documented one final time in a formal set of photographs. Nobody realized it at the time, but those would turn out to be among the very last photos ever taken of it. By the summer of 1944, Allied bombers had started targeting Königsberg itself, directly and repeatedly. Rode finally agreed the room needed to come down again. This time, there wasn't much time to be careful. Crews worked in a hurry, crating the panels for a second time, hoping to move them somewhere safer underground. The last sighting. On the night of August 29, 1944, British bombers hit Königsberg in one of the heaviest raids of the war. The historic old town, built mostly from wood and stone centuries earlier, burned for days afterward. The castle took direct hits too. Fires spread through several of its ancient stone wings. Rode reportedly rushed back to the castle as soon as he could, desperate to check on the crates. Some accounts say the crated amber panels were still sitting in a castle hall when the fires broke out. Other accounts insist the crates had already been moved to a cellar or a separate building before the raid. Even people who were there that week couldn't fully agree on exactly what happened or exactly when. In his own private notes, Rode wrote that some crates had survived the fire, badly scorched but intact. Soviet investigators later found charred bronze door fittings and melted decorative elements in the castle ruins. But amber itself burns fast and completely, leaving almost nothing solid behind for anyone to find. So the burned metal evidence proved almost nothing. It only deepened the argument over what had actually survived. With the city collapsing around him, Rode had bigger problems than solving that particular mystery. The Soviet Red Army was closing in fast, and Königsberg's final battle hadn't even started yet. Whatever remained of the Amber Room, crated, burned, or hidden, was about to disappear even further from view, into the ruins. By early 1945, the Soviet army had pushed all the way to the gates of Königsberg itself. The battle for the city in April of 1945 was brutal, days of close, street-by-street fighting. What was left of the castle by then had already been gutted by fire months earlier. Soviet soldiers searched the ruins almost immediately, hunting for any sign of the missing crates. They found plenty of debris. They did not find 27 crates of amber panels. Within weeks, the war in Europe ended entirely, and the search for the Amber Room began in earnest. The same curator who'd tried to hide the room back in 1941 was assigned to help find it again. He interviewed surviving castle staff, cross-checked old records, and combed through every surviving fragment of paperwork. Königsberg itself didn't survive the war intact either. It became part of the Soviet Union and got a brand new name. The city was renamed Kaliningrad. Much of its German history was quite deliberately erased or rebuilt over. The castle ruins themselves sat abandoned for years, a haunting shell nobody quite knew what to do with. In 1968, Soviet authorities made a controversial call. They demolished what remained of the castle completely. Whatever clues those ruins might still have held were buried under rubble, then paved over entirely. Today, a massive Soviet-era government building sits on that same spot. The castle basement is somewhere underneath it. That basement, by the way, still hasn't been fully excavated. Nobody's entirely sure what's actually down there. It's one of the strongest theories anyone has, that the answer is sitting under a parking lot in Kaliningrad. Kuchumov's Cold Trail. The Soviet government formed an official commission specifically to track down looted art, including the Amber Room. Investigators tracked down German officers and soldiers who'd been stationed in Königsberg during the war. Some gave detailed, confident answers. Unfortunately, those answers rarely agreed with each other. One theory placed the crates in a specific castle cellar. Another insisted they'd been moved out days earlier. A third theory claimed the crates never even reached Königsberg's final battle. They'd been shipped out west first. Kuchumov chased every lead personally, traveling to interview witnesses across a country still rebuilding from war. Some search teams physically dug through the ruins, hoping brute force might succeed where records had failed. They found fragments of furniture, scraps of decoration, and plenty of unrelated wartime debris. No amber. Kuchumov grew convinced the trail had gone cold specifically because someone, somewhere, was hiding the truth. Cold War tensions didn't help. Soviet investigators couldn't easily interview witnesses now living in West Germany. Files that might have held answers sat locked away on both sides of an increasingly hostile political divide. By the 1950s, the official search had mostly stalled. Kuchumov, though, never quite let the case go. He kept collecting leads privately for decades, convinced that someone, someday, would find the answer. Meanwhile, outside official channels entirely, a very different kind of search was just getting started. Theories in the dark. So where is it? After 80 years, there are really only a handful of serious theories left. Theory 1, and the one most historians actually believe, it burned completely during that August 1944 bombing raid. Amber burns fast and completely at surprisingly low temperatures. A hot enough fire would leave almost nothing behind. That's the boring answer, historically speaking. It's also, frustratingly, the most statistically likely one. Theory 2 is more romantic. The crates survived the fire and got hidden somewhere in a bunker nearby. Post-war Königsberg was riddled with military bunkers, tunnels, and underground shelters built for exactly this kind of chaos. Search teams have explored dozens of these bunkers over the decades. So far, every single one has come up empty. Theory 3 points to the sea, crates loaded onto a ship fleeing west as the Soviet army closed in. In the war's final months, German ships evacuating East Prussia were being sunk by Soviet submarines regularly. Some researchers believe the Amber Room may simply be sitting on the floor of the Baltic Sea right now. Divers have actually searched several of these wrecks. No confirmed amber crates have ever turned up. Theory 4 is darker, that certain Nazi officials smuggled it out entirely, planning to sell it after the war. This theory usually points toward a hidden salt mine somewhere in central Germany, used for other looted treasures too. Those salt mines were real, and they really did hide looted art. Just apparently, not this particular treasure. There's even a theory that Stalin secretly recovered the room himself and quietly kept it hidden for propaganda reasons. Most historians consider that one a stretch. There's just no solid evidence the Soviets ever actually found it. So take your pick: burned, buried, sunk, or smuggled. Every theory has believers, and every theory has holes. And for decades, a small, determined group of people has tried to prove one of these theories once and for all: the Amber Room curse. Here's the part that turned this from a historical mystery into something people call cursed. Right after the war, Soviet investigators tracked down the museum curator who'd overseen the room in Königsberg. He agreed to an interview. Before it could happen, he reportedly fell seriously ill very suddenly. According to official records, he died of typhus within days, along with his wife shortly after. The timing struck a lot of people as, at minimum, remarkably convenient. Some historians think it really was just bad luck. Typhus outbreaks were common in post-war chaos and crowding. Others suspect he was silenced before he could reveal exactly where the crates had gone. Years later, a Soviet general who'd publicly discussed his own Amber Room theories died in a sudden car accident. Coincidence? Almost certainly. But by then, people had started keeping a running list. The most famous name on that list belongs to a German schoolteacher turned amateur historian named Georg Stein. Stein spent over a decade chasing leads across Germany, convinced he was closer than any official investigation had gotten. In 1987, he told colleagues he'd finally found something significant. Days later, he checked into a small hotel. He was found dead in a nearby forest shortly after. Officials ruled it a suicide, but friends and fellow researchers weren't convinced. He'd seemed excited, not desperate, right before he disappeared. No solid evidence of foul play was ever found. The case officially stayed closed. Still, it's not hard to see why people started calling this the most dangerous treasure hunt in modern history. A Fragment Returns. Then, in 1997, something happened that changed the whole conversation. A real piece actually turned up. A family in Bremen, Germany, tried to sell an old stone mosaic panel through an art dealer. Experts recognized it almost instantly. It matched one of 4 stone mosaic panels from the original Amber Room. The family explained their late father had served in Königsberg and brought it home after the war. Whether he'd looted it, been given it, or simply found it in the ruins, nobody could say for certain. The panel was seized and eventually returned to Russia, the first confirmed piece recovered in over 50 years. For researchers, this was huge. It proved conclusively that at least some pieces had survived that final chaos. If one panel made it out in a soldier's luggage, logic suggests other pieces might have too. 3 of the 4 original stone panels are still missing today. Somewhere they might still exist. It wasn't the whole amber room, but it was real, physical proof the mystery wasn't entirely unsolvable. Rebuilding a wonder. By the late 1970s, Soviet officials decided it was time to stop searching and start rebuilding instead. In 1979, a small team of master craftsmen began the slow, painstaking work of recreating the room from scratch. There was just one enormous problem. Nobody alive still knew exactly how the original amber work had been done. The specific technique had essentially died out. Modern craftsmen had to relearn an almost lost art from scratch. They studied old photographs pixel by pixel, cross-referencing every visible mosaic pattern they could find. Progress was painfully slow. Funding came and went, depending on which government happened to be in charge that year. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed entirely, and the reconstruction project nearly collapsed right along with it. For a few years, it genuinely looked like the replacement room might end up unfinished, just like the original once had. Then, in 1999, an unexpected donor stepped forward. A German energy company offered millions to finish the project. It was a quietly symbolic gesture, German money helping finish a project that a German raid had once interrupted. With fresh funding, the final years of work moved much faster than the previous 2 decades combined. Every mosaic pattern, every mirrored corner, every gold leaf detail was checked obsessively against the surviving photographs. In total, the reconstruction took roughly 24 years and cost more than $11 million. It used newly sourced Baltic amber, since almost none of the original material had ever been recovered. By 2003, the new room was finally ready, just in time for a very significant anniversary. St. Petersburg was turning 300 years old, and its most famous lost treasure was about to return. Unveiled. In May of 2003, dignitaries gathered at the palace for an official reopening ceremony. Officials from both nations stood together for the unveiling, a quiet, symbolic bookend to the whole saga. When the doors finally opened, the room looked almost exactly like it had nearly 90 years earlier. For many in that crowd, this was the closest thing to closure this story was ever going to get. It wasn't the original. Every panel was newly made, but it captured the exact feeling people had described for centuries. Today, the reconstructed room welcomes hundreds of thousands of visitors every single year. For most of them, it's simply beautiful. For a smaller few, it's a reminder of a mystery still unsolved, because somewhere out there, the real one, the original, is still, technically, missing. Legacy of the Lost Room. Search teams still head out to Kaliningrad most summers, chasing new leads. New rumors, new half-remembered stories. New technology keeps opening new possibilities, ground-penetrating radar, old satellite photos, digitized German military archives. Every few years, someone announces a promising new lead. So far, none of them have panned out. Maybe it really did burn to nothing in that August fire, and the search has been chasing ashes all along. Or maybe in some forgotten bunker or quiet basement, 6 tons of amber are still sitting exactly where they were left. Either way, the reconstructed room in St. Petersburg stands today as proof the story itself refuses to disappear. It survived war, fire, decades of silence, and one of the most stubborn treasure hunts in modern history. So, burned, buried, sunk, or simply lost to time, which theory do you find most convincing? Drop your theory in the comments. This is exactly the kind of mystery that deserves to stay argued over. And if you want more real mysteries pulled straight out of history, you already know where to find us. See you next time.